Eat human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
ピーク人間
We're back for season 8 of the podcast. I took an unannounced break to work on the Food Lies film and make sure I'm getting top quality episodes and guests. I really don't want to just crank these out each week for the sake of having an episode to release. I'm constantly reading books, watching lectures, reading scientific papers, and previously going to conferences to seek out the best guests the world has to offer. Our guest today, Mary Ruddick, is just that. She's a nutritionist, teacher, and author of books and online educational programs. People come to Mary to resolve their otherwise impossible health conditions. She teaches them tools they can implement to rebuild their own immune systems, nervous systems, holobiome, and microbiome, and once again take control of their health. Mary specializes in rebalancing the microbiome by addressing nutritional and epigenetic aspects that underlie various physical and mental health disorders. She's a specialist in the fields of autoimmunity, histamine intolerance, mental disorders, and nervous system disorders that include dysautonomia, seizure disorders, and autism. She's been a nutrition professor. She's traveled the world living with and observing other cultures and native living tribes. She's worked for big organizations teaching them about diet and lifestyles for disease prevention. She's miraculously cured her own ailments that had her bedbound for years and years, and so much more. I've been talking to her for months and months, and I'm ready to call her the Sherlock Holmes of health. She's the real deal, so I really hope you listen to this episode in entirety. We even have a part 2 coming out next week. So I hope everyone got a chance to catch up on the back catalog of episodes during this little break. I'm so happy to hear all the great life transformations taking place, especially when people go back to listen from episode 1. All right, so another reason I don't need to crank out episodes each week is I don't have any sponsors. So far, I've turned them all down so I can remain independent from any outside interests. I have my own beneficial products and services we offer at sapien.org and nosetotale.org to support the show, the film, myself, and my great team. I make a lot less money this way, but it's a lot more satisfying to not have to rely on anyone else or promote any other products. However, it only works if people support Sapien and Nose to Tail. Luckily, we have amazing things to offer. Sapien is the health platform I've built with my business partner, Dr. Gary. We have a practice in Woodland Hills, California, as well as an online program anyone in the world can join if they're serious about weight loss and disease reversal using diet and lifestyle. You can find out more about the program at sapien.org. You can also get the free Sapien food guide there. Another thing we've got going is a Sapien tribe. We have a growing community of people who are living this lifestyle and dominating life. I know that sounds pretty bro-y, but it's really what's happening. People have gone from a life of mediocrity or even ill health to being in top shape, reversing their chronic disease, having great body composition, and not getting sick anymore. Tribe members also get all the extras like the bonus episodes of this podcast, the extended show notes, the private members area, and special access and live Zoom calls with Dr. Gary and me. You can find that at sapien.org as well. You can also get the Nose to Tail meats at nosetotale.org, where we ship grass-finished, ethically and sustainably raised beef, buffalo, pork, and chicken to your door. It's all raised in Texas and ships out each week to the 48 contiguous states. Our specialty products include ground beef with liver, heart, kidney, and spleen mixed in. I don't know of anyone else getting all these organs mixed in like we do. I think it's the best and tastiest way to eat the fresh organs to get the ultimate and nutrient-dense bioavailable nutrition. We also have high omega-3, low omega-6 pork and chicken. We feed them a special gluten-free, non-GMO feed that makes their meat and fat very low in PUFAs. I can go on forever about how great this stuff is, but just check it out for yourself at nosetotale.org. I can't wait to share the new whole food products we're developing that will be out soon. Follow at Eat Nose to Tail on Instagram or Twitter for updates. We got some exciting stuff coming. You can also follow me on any platform if you search for Food Lies. I'm putting out all kinds of info each week, and we have some good discussions going on there as well. Don't forget about YouTube, a bunch of great videos to check out. So that's all for now. Thanks for listening and sharing this show and any other content. Please give this podcast a review in the podcast app or on iTunes. Check out sapien.org and nosetotale.org so you can stop listening to me try to talk really fast and get to the show so you can listen to the nutrition genius, Mary Ruddick. Here she is. Well, here we are. Mary, you're in Ikaria in Greece. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I'm in the famous Blue Zone Island where people tend to live over 100. It is sunny and warm every day. The sea is turquoise green. The food is good. I couldn't be better.
That sounds so awesome. But I heard, what is it, all plants? Is everyone vegan there?
It's quite the opposite. It's actually been shocking. So I had an inkling that this was not plant-based because I live in Greece and I've lived in Greece for quite some time. I've been to a lot of islands and the Greeks are not vegetarians by any means. They eat a ton of meat, a ton of animal products, lots of dairy. When I read the Blue Zone book and when I heard the podcasts and the videos and everything else, I had to come and see for myself. I booked a trip and I'm here now for quite a few weeks exploring and seeing what's going on. And I've got to say, it's actually shocking. I didn't think it was going to be as shocking as it is. So to give you an example, I'll tell you about my dinner tonight. After spending a beautiful day at the beach, we stopped by a roadside cafe and sat down. It was all locals, just a few people. And one thing I want to give you is the setting of this beautiful restaurant, because it is very relaxing on this island. Like everyone has said, it actually feels different when you get here. You know, your cells kind of relax. You breathe a bit different. When you're sitting at this table, you have mountain views going out for several miles with wildflowers that come up over your table in an awning and surround you. And so you have this kind of framework of flowers leading out to the mountains. And then you've got your table and you've got these old men smoking their cigarettes and drinking their beer, flirting with everyone. They're very vivacious at all ages. And at this particular restaurant, there was no menu. It's an oral menu. So it's whatever they have that day. And the specials today were pig liver, pig head soup, lamb on the bone, which is called lamb fricassee. It's my favorite Greek dish. It's lamb with egg and a lemon sauce, and pork sausage with spearmint. So these were the specials of the day, and this is what the Greeks were eating. Now, that's quite different than all the vegetarian bean-based dishes that we keep hearing about. And so we spoke with the people and they actually let us into the kitchen, which was amazing to see. You walk in and they've got the pig head stew right in front of you. It's staring at you. They're making their own cheese. It's hanging on the wall. And then they've got their array of local vegetables, things that grow here seasonally. And in summer, we actually get a good amount of things. Like just on a quick mountain drive, we saw so many wild figs and olives and prickly pears and all sorts of wonderful things. So it's by no means, Greece and Ikaria in particular, not carnivore and not ketogenic, but very high protein. It is definitely not low protein, very high fat. And even the Blue Zone.
I love it. This is so interesting.
Oh, no, it's jaw-dropping, to be honest, because even the Blue Zone writer noted that 50% of the diet came from fat, but what he missed, and I actually just took pictures of this in the book, he made a pie chart of what they're eating. He didn't include dairy. They eat a huge portion of their diet from dairy, specifically from goat and sheep, that nice A2 dairy. And those guys are out there eating the wild herbs, very nutrient dense fat profile in this cheese. So there was a big blind spot there. But yeah, so in this kitchen, they're making the stew, they're preparing pork neck skewers or souvlaki, as they would say. And we asked them, we say, how often do you guys eat meat? They don't know who we are. We don't have any cameras out, nothing, right? Because we didn't want to assist what they were saying. And they said, almost every meal. So it's a small sampling, it's a group of people here, but it's definitely been representational of our experience far and wide. The other thing that I found really interesting here is everything is very, very local, of course. And in Greece, you still find this. So if you go to a mountain town, even 20 minutes drive from the ocean, you will not get fish. You're going to get lamb and goats and dairy. Whereas if you're on the coast, you're going to get fish. You're not going to get meat. And that's pretty widespread along Greece. But the thing I think is so fascinating is the way that they do desserts. Now, the Greeks like their sweets. They love honey, and they cultivate beautiful types of honey, like thyme honey and wild oregano honey, and all of these really lovely flavors, quite medicinal. But that is their dessert, yogurt with honey or fruit. Whereas, like watermelon was served tonight. Whereas in the States, we very much think of fruit as a healthy way to start the day, or yogurt as a breakfast. Right? Not a dessert. Very different way of thinking.
I love that. Well, it sounds like they're doing basically everything right. And we can get into more of their lifestyle too and the other blue zones. But a few things. So one, Mary is the woman I mentioned in my last podcast with Paul Saladino that's going to show us around Africa. And we're going to check out some of the tribes, the Hadza and the Samburu, the Maasai. The border's ever open. We're kind of just in this waiting game. And in the meantime, you went over to Ikaria because you're from Greece originally, and you've been living in Africa, stuck there during COVID lockdown thing. So that's some little more context. Also, we're talking about Dan Buettner's blue zone. So there's also, you're talking about this cognitive dissonance that people have, right? Or they come with agendas. They come with this agenda, like he had this idea, I'm going to show the world that all these blue zones are plant-based and all that. And then you kind of just see what you want to see and leave out what doesn't fit your agenda.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. It's wildly different than it's been portrayed in all the YouTube videos and everything else. We've only seen beans once on a menu, and I've purposely been taking pictures of all the menus of everywhere we go. And they're typically 3/4 animal base, which is either meat or dairy or egg base, and 1/4 vegetable dishes. And those are typically served drowning in fat. So here they use a lot of animal fats. In fact, goat ghee is very popular. You see it at every market. And then you've got really good butter. This time of year, though, you're going to see more olive oil. They're very seasonal with their foods, the way people used to be 50 years ago. So here it's hot in the summer, so butter isn't going to be served because it's going to melt. But ghee isn't going to go bad, so that's used, and the olive oil.
I love that. It's so local. I mean, that's kind of the solution to all this health stuff is if you're eating, as Gary Fettke says, fresh, local, seasonal.
Completely.
That's all everyone's always done. And you solve your problems. Even within a few miles, they're eating fresh, local, seasonal, like in the mountains or the sea, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I went on a mountain vacation 2 years ago in Greece, up to the snowy mountains and the ski ranges. And it was incredible because the buffet that was served for breakfast at the restaurant, or at the hotel rather, all came from within a mile. And that's just normal for them. It's not special. It's not hipster. It's not like some Portland fancy restaurant. It's normal. The main things that I've seen that have really changed and that are very different, even from the 80s and the 90s, but definitely from the 1800s, is some of the vegetables that they use, like the potato, the tomato, cucumber, these kind of things, eggplant, they're all new introductions into the Greek diet. But otherwise, yeah, they eat them all locally.
Great. So it sounds like they're not using a whole bunch of industrial seed oils.
Not at all.
Which seems like every podcast lately
goes into, well, I'm not surprised. It's most likely the smoking gun. Now, I think because I do work with so many patients on the very ill spectrum and with lots of kind of unique, difficult to treat things, I'm not one that can really summarize what you need to do down to 1 or 3 things. I'm more like, okay, there's these 100 things you need to do, and this is how you do it, and this is how you simplify. But the seed oils definitely seem to have triggered the majority of the chronic illnesses that have happened, because as we can see from many traditional cultures, they range from very high carb, like some of the Latin American tribes and regions, to 0 carb. And they were all in perfect health until the industrial era, right? Until we started changing the way we processed food, and especially after the late 1800s and specifically early 1900s, when the public started consuming seed oils.
Yeah. And we've had many podcasts. I was going to say just the last one with Saladino, and we have Dr. Kate Shanahan, we have Dr. Chris Kenobi, we have Tucker Goodrich, all kinds of evidence pointing to the seed oil. But then again, I didn't push back enough on Saladino last episode that there are cases of people with obesity and insulin resistance without seed oils. I mean, I'm
Absolutely.
sure you go around Greece, right? Or just this land of beef suet or goat suet and all the animal fats and real olive oil. They don't have industrial seed oils, yet they have high sugar foods. Maybe some people drink too much and they eat too many sweets beyond the dessert you mentioned sounded really good. But I mean, not everyone's doing this. So there are people with diseases, insulin resistance and obesity in these places who are going to the extremes.
I think that's because there are so many things that can cause insulin resistance and obesity. It's not just one thing. I would say the seed oils are a big thing, that's not helping us, but there's many other things that contribute. So in Greece, you have kind of an interesting picture because the Greeks are very traditional. They're a bit of a monoculture. And so you'll notice when you come, all the buildings are white, the doors are blue, they all eat the same things, the restaurants all have the same food, these kind of things. They're not quick to adopt anything. In fact, it's very unique when they bring something in. And when they do, they swear it's been there forever. It's hilarious. So take the potato, for example. The potato, of course, is from America, as the nightshades are. And when they tried to bring it to Greece, the farmers looked at it and they practically spit at the people who were trying to import it. They were like, why would we want this tasteless, disgusting vegetable? Take your potato and go. So the man was quite smart, and he set up this huge pile of potatoes on the dock where the ferries come in and the shipments come in, and set up 10 armed guards around it. And he told the armed guards that if anyone came, turn a blind eye. So of course the locals came and they stole the potatoes because now they look valuable, right?
Wow.
And so they stole the potatoes, they adopted the potatoes into their diet. And then it spread like wildfire because if one does it, they all do it, typically. And so you now have potatoes being served with all of these dishes, and Ikaria is no different. They serve potatoes with all of these dishes, or at least a lot of them, not with the liver or the pork head stew, but with most of the dishes, the souvlaki and those kind of things, you would get potato with it. So I was talking to my partner who is Greek and lived here in the 80s and 90s. And he said it's been really interesting because the potatoes went from this kind of small side dish that was served occasionally and cooked for a very long time and prepared with lemon and fresh herbs and these kind of things, to in the 90s being put into the dishes as French fries. And now there's French fries everywhere. But you'll notice if you sit here and you watch people in cafes, the locals with the local accent don't typically eat them. It's mostly for the tourist. It is being adopted though, and I will say you can see it. Like when you're in Athens, although the city people are still far more healthy than people in the States, and I'll give you some examples of why that's so apparent. They're still they're getting jiggly bellies and all the things that go along with that. There's a lot of bald spots and all these kinds of things that indicate maybe things aren't going perfectly, but it hasn't affected the oldies yet. So the oldies are really interesting, and I think they're worth studying for more than just diet. I think for lifestyle as well. One thing that really fascinates me about this country is that there is no disability access anywhere you go. And the whole towns, all of them, from the streets to the steps to the buildings, they're all made out of marble, right? Because that's what Greece is made out of. That's why it's this beautiful white and blue country. Well, marble, the second it gets wet, is like a slip and slide. It's basically a suicide march if you try to go out. Yeah. And yet there's all these old ladies dressed in their widow black, in their 90s, shuffling down these marble spiral staircases that most people would die from. And the lights turn out while you're on the stairs, right? So they're doing it in pitch black dark, hauling their groceries up and down, and then walking down the streets, often, a mile or so to the market. And the street doesn't even have a smooth sidewalk. It looks like an earthquake just happened. So they're really incredible because you talk to any Greek grandmas, they're called yayas, and they cook for themselves and they clean for themselves and they exercise and they go for a swim in the Mediterranean. And they're really robust, hardy individuals, very hardy. And I think what makes Ikaria a little special is that here you have more men that live into the 90s than inland. Inland, you get lots of women. You see a lot of widows. You don't see as many old men, which is a little bit different than Sardinia and some of the other blue zones. But in Ikaria, it's a lot of the old men. So I think they have to stay sharp because you can't be disabled here, basically. Yeah, you would immediately just fall off the bandwagon.
Wow. Yeah. That's interesting. And we're so used to having people, even we have like rascal scooters for people to go around grocery stores. They can't even walk and do their shopping. They're so big. Yet here, it's the exact opposite. People in their 90s walking around. It sounds like they have good balance. Like all of this core strength that they have, that's so important to keep your strength as you age and have that balance. And so many people lose all that here and fall over and then end up passing away.
So to give you an example, I think you would like this because this just gave me kittens earlier today. When we were at the restaurant and they let us into the kitchen, they had us go around back. And around back, we walked up all of these stairs, about 2-3 flights of stairs, and we get to the grandma's house. Now, any good Greek restaurant is going to have the oldest matriarch in the family cooking, and this was no different. So here comes this woman, 93 years old, carrying a huge soup pot with the organ meats, the other organ meats, so not the liver. They were making the kidney and all of these kinds of things, carrying it all the way down all of these stairs. She still works full time at 93. So yeah, just very different. You won't see any walkers or scooters or anything like that. And I think because that's not an option, people stay much more fit. That whole taking responsibility for your health, that relates back to really some old studies from the 80s and 90s on lifestyle and how that affects health, which I've always found fascinating, that you can get at these things through the way that you live, or the way that you think, or the way that you eat. And, if you put all three together, you're going to be really good. Well, in these studies, they took some retirement villages and old people homes, and they put them all out on a field. They took everybody out and they asked them to walk, and they measured their stride. Well, as you can imagine, the more sick someone was, the shorter their stride was. And the healthier someone was, the longer their stride was. Well, what they did was they took the people with the short strides and they asked them to purposefully elongate their strides for a period of time. And they came back and they studied them again. All of their health profiles had improved pretty dramatically. So they did it the reverse. They took the people that had the long strides and had them shorten their stride. All of them, their health got worse, which I find interesting when you tie in things like posture and how hormones are produced, right? That if you're slouching over, the serotonin isn't going to get fully to your brain, right? Or take the plant experiment in another retirement village. And they've replicated this one many times, and I just love it. It was a big inspiration for me back in the day. What they did was they gave everyone in the village a plant. And for half of the people, they said, we're going to put this plant in your room. Don't worry about it. We're going to come in, we're going to water it, we'll dust it. We're going to take care of it. It's just for your pleasure kind of thing. And then the other half, they gave them the plants and they said, listen, we're going to give you these plants. It's up to you if it lives or dies. We really don't care what you do with this plant, but it's here and good luck. Well, the people that had to take care of the plant, all of their health improved drastically. The idea of being responsible for something and having a purpose, even if it's as small as taking care of a plant, is actually imperative. So what you see in Greece, lifestyle-wise, is all of these elderly people still having a full purpose in life, still doing their jobs, still going to the market for themselves, still either driving or walking to where they need to go, really not relying on other people. In fact, they're really giving back more than they're relying. And I think there's a lot to that I would love for us to study further and implement in all of our clinics.
It's huge. And there's a story, I think it was on this podcast, someone talked about a car. If you earn all the money, you have summer jobs, you get your first car, you are taking care of it. You are washing it. The opposite example is they had a community car in a village. I forget what this is from, this story. Someone told me. And the community vehicle was just run down and broken within 6 months because it was no one's responsibility. It was just like, oh yeah, here's a free car and we get to all use it. No one has responsibility. So
exactly.
It's huge. It's huge. Yes. And then another big point we're saying it is your community, what's around you, beyond just your community. That's a whole nother topic of the community and living with other people and all that type of stuff. But what I'm talking about is your environment of who's around you, the shape of people who's around you. If you're in the South in America and everyone's 250 pounds, you think it's okay to be 250 pounds. If everyone around you is in Greece, walking up steps, climbing mountains, is 9 years old and it's fit, then guess what you're going to be? You're going to be fit.
Exactly. Because you get a certain sense of pride, right? No one wants to be shamed. And so if everyone is really taking full responsibility for themselves, it's less likely to find someone who's not in that community.
There's a momentum to this. And yes, I talked about on previous podcasts too about Japan and the culture. It's like sort of shaming or dishonorable to be overweight. People are overweight here. They're adding in too many potatoes, too many starches, along with a high-fat diet. think there's kind of a problem there. This is a recurring theme where if you're eating, you're eating the high starch, high carbs, and the high fat at the same time, it's not good, even without the vegetable oils.
Yes, absolutely. Although I would not say traditionally that was always the case. I think you can look at the French and the Japanese for that. Both of them, when you go to those countries, I don't know if you've been, but I was really surprised by how few vegetables they eat. It's very much like protein rice or protein bread. And fat,
that is
a lot
true.
of fat. Yeah. And so it wasn't always the case, I don't think. I do see starch as a huge problem right now, situationally, but not historically. So we had all of these cultures that ate lots of starchy things, but they prepared them in the correct way. And they had the ancient microbiome pre the Industrial Revolution. We have a very different microbiome today. And so within the microbiome, that's anywhere from 60 to 90% of our bodies. The scientists are warring over that right now, but I say it's semantics. It's the majority of our body. We've got these three families of bacteria. We've got
by cells, by weight, by
weight. Yeah, by weight. So we've got the good bacteria, the opportunistic, and the pathogenic. And the good bacteria, they can eat anything, at least as far as we know. They can eat the starch, they can eat the protein, they can eat the fat. That's why we've got people on this earth that can eat carnivore diets and be in perfect health, right? That's all that's required for the human cell and also for the good bacteria. The opportunistic bacteria and the pathogenic, it's a different story. They can only strive on starch and very specific types of sugars, not all. And so when you start to imbalance this microbiome, and get an overgrowth of the opportunistic bacteria, which has happened for a lot of people, because to be honest, outside of the Russians, most people didn't even know what the microbiome was until this last decade, our medical community included. And so although the Russians have been studying this for a long time, we're in our infancy as far as what we understand about the microbiome. What we do know, though, is what these bacteria eat and how long they live for. So far, with all the individual bacteria, for which there are trillions, they live for up to 2 years, some for a day, some for 3 days, these kind of things. But what I see is that, if you look at someone like maybe one of my ancestors in France in the 1700s, before the Industrial Revolution, before Clorox and vegetable oils and antibiotics and all these things, and birthing practices, when they would eat their French bread, that was perfectly fermented bread. That was fermented for 72 hours and still is today.
Exactly. Well, that's some Bill Schindler talk. He was on the recent podcast, but yeah, keep going.
Oh, good. Anyway, so they would eat that. And that would typically, if you have a healthy microbiome, that starch is going to feed the good bacteria, not the overgrowth. But you take a modern microbiome that's had antibiotics, maybe was born via C-section or wasn't nursed or uses a lot of Clorox or doesn't get sunlight, right? So many people are hiding from the sun, and that's really damaging on the microbiome and our health. And now it's the opportunistic bacteria eating that bread and that starch, because we don't break down our food. It's really our bacteria that do. We eat their byproduct. So you get a very different picture. In one picture, the person is eating the good bacteria is eating the starch, and that good bacteria in its digestive process is typically releasing butyric acid, which is a fatty acid like omega-3. So it's anti-inflammatory for the body. It seems, at least in studies, to protect against colon cancer and all sorts of good things. And then in another picture with a different microbiome, you're feeding the same kind of bread, 72-hour ferment, or it could be rice, it's semantics, but it's starch. And now it's feeding the overgrowth. Now the overgrowth, when it digests your food, doesn't release something anti-inflammatory. It releases a very mild toxin. But if you're doing that every day, those toxins accumulate and they create inflammation. And this actually goes into weight gain, which I think we should touch upon, because it's not as complicated as everyone seems to think. It's actually pretty simple. The fat cells, they have a main purpose in the body, and that purpose is to store toxins. Now they do some other things with energy and these kind of things, but they really store our toxins, and they're a sign of inflammation in the body. So when someone is dealing with an overgrowth, and it could be mild or it could be severe, when that person is eating these starches or the sugars that feed the overgrowth, they're constantly producing this toxic load within the body. Our bodies have wonderful detox mechanisms to them, right? We really don't have to go on some juice cleanse or detox. In fact, I don't recommend it. We've got our liver, our kidney, we've got our skin, our colon, all sorts of things to take care of this. But as these toxins are produced, they go into the blood supply. And of course, it's the liver's job to clean the blood. So it gets to work doing that. But with this constant supply of little toxins, it gets overwhelmed. And if the person is healthy enough, the liver is going to communicate to the brain via the nervous system and say, hey, I could really use a day off. I am exhausted. And the brain will say, no problem. I'll create a fat cell. So a fat cell is created, the toxins are stored, the liver's job is a bit easier. Now, that doesn't happen in everyone. In a lot of people, those toxins go to other fatty tissues, right? So our nervous system is primarily fat. Our brain, our hair follicles are actually the fattiest tissue in the body. And so, when people complain about losing hair on any kind of medical diet, or when they're really sick and they're losing a lot of hair, that's often because these toxins from their digestive system are going to the fatty tissue and causing the hair loss. So it's actually, this weight gain mechanism of the body is actually quite protective of the body and is a sign that the body is working well, but is also overburdened.
Wow, I love that. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go into the microbiome more. You're sort of an expert in that. We actually need to kind of pause and let people know who you are, your history. I mean, I'll give you a little intro that I'll do for this podcast, but I want to hear your whole credentials and backstory. So maybe we can just take a detour and do that.
So my postgraduate work is in nutrition, and I do specialize in the microbiome, the nervous system, the immune system, and really quite difficult to treat illnesses, so the rare ones. I've been a professor at several colleges, and I've taught courses on things like the microbiome, preventing Alzheimer's, insulin, all of these kinds of things. And traditional diets, of course, it's a big passion of mine. And then I've also been the director of nutrition for a mental health clinic in Oregon for many, many years, which may sound like an odd marriage, but it's actually quite perfect. It came out of my working with a patient who was a therapist, and she was so happy with our work together. She started referring patients to me from her practice, and they healed so quickly. They were able to reverse their anxiety, their depression, their schizophrenia, these kind of things, that after about 40 patients, she actually picked up her whole family and her livelihood and moved all the way out to Oregon, where I was, and opened this mental health clinic and made me the director. And so from there, we shared hundreds of patients. Yeah, we're best friends now. It's really great. We still work together. She's on part of one of my educational programs. And so we shared all these patients together, and we really noticed, because I am a nutritionist and I do focus on food, but I do a ton of limbic system and lifestyle things, as really, I think it would behoove everyone if they're working on healing anything, because lifestyle activities help or affect the microbiome really as much as diet does. So anyway, I did that for many, many years until our practices became full and we put it on an online program, kind of what we were doing. And then I was featured in Palmer Capola's book. She reversed her own autoimmunity, her MS, and wrote a wonderful book. And I got a nice feature in there, and lots of my recipes are in there after helping her on her journey. And currently, I've got my private practice where I see people. And then I also am working for Alliance Healthcare, which is a health insurance company out of Africa, where we have teamed up together. And we are creating programs to help people reverse their conditions. It's kind of funny because often people think of health insurance companies as the bad guy, but if you think about it, there's a great opportunity there. They really don't want people to be sick either. So they don't want to pay those
cost
bills.
Them money. Yeah.
Yeah. So the patients and the health insurance company actually have similar motives. That is to get people better and keep them better and prevent them from getting sick. So they've hired me to create these programs for their cancer patients. These are dietary and lifestyle programs. They're diabetes type 1 and type 2. They're autoimmune patients, and kind of their big dollar programs. And we're going to watch that over the next couple of years, see our success rate, and then hopefully take that on to other health insurance companies and see if we can't turn the tides, so to speak. So I'm doing that. And then, of course, like I said, I've got my private practice, and I'm working quite a bit in the mental health care, as well as autoimmunity, cancer, these kind of conditions. I didn't say earlier, but one of the reasons why the mental health issues and my work go together so well is because we have this huge nervous system. About 70% of our nervous system is in the gut lining. It's called the migratory motor complex, and it produces most of our feel-good chemicals, the majority of our serotonin, but honestly, the majority of our other ones as well. And for them to be produced properly and go to the receptors and go up to the brain and do all the things that they're supposed to do, you really need very specific foods in your diet to create that. And you also need very specific bacteria as well. So with the work that I do, I teach people how to rebuild their nervous system, their immune system, which is also within the gut lining, get them the new villies and the new bacteria. And a lot of times their body will take over from there, produce those feel-good chemicals, and get them feeling the joy of life again.
Wow, that's amazing. Everything you're doing is so cool. We've been talking for months, and we were talking about how the weight loss stuff is so straightforward. It's like almost like a break for you. You work on the really complicated, hard to do stuff that people can't figure out. So why don't you talk about that?
Oh gosh. It's so rare for me to get a weight loss patient. And when I get one, it is like my coffee break. I'm pleased as punch because it's so simple in compared to the other things. And also it's very rewarding because they tend to get very quick results, and I can give them some mental solace. These poor people have been going around and they've really been blamed for their condition. So they have a lot of guilt. They think it's a character flaw. And they actually haven't been given the right information as to what they have to do to get better and what this weight really indicates. So it's really nice because usually in the first session, I can communicate that to them, and we'll go through all the science and the biochemistry behind it. And they feel this immense sense of relief, like, this is my responsibility. I'm huge on the responsibility, but it's not my fault, right? Which is very different.
Love that.
Yes.
I kind of push back against the fat acceptance movement because it's shifting all blame away. And people think that they're just built like this. Oh, I'm just genetically doomed. You're saying it's the exact opposite, which I completely agree with. They just have the wrong information.
They do. I think the fat acceptance movement is very damaging to the people themselves that are in it, to be honest. I'm all for, I think self-love is very important, and acceptance of the current situation is actually imperative for someone to get better, right? If someone doesn't accept the situation that they're in, they will never get better. So being like, yes, I am obese and I am overweight and my body still does amazing things for me. I can walk down the street and I can make myself food and I have all these great friends. Like there's a million reasons to love your body. And in fact, what I do with my patients who are obese and also my ones who are like bedbound from illness and these kind of things, both of those groups tend to have a lot of self-hate and distrust of their body, rightly so, right? And so a huge part of what we do is build this morning routine where they keep a very extensive gratitude journal. And this is not a catalog of things you're grateful for like people do for Thanksgiving on Facebook, listing 3 things. We actually go really nitty gritty. I'll have them focus on their liver for 6 pages as to why they're grateful that their liver is working, or their pinky toe, right? So that they can genuinely, very deeply fall in love with themselves, not this kind of like surface, accept me as I am movement.
Everything you're saying is blowing my mind. It's music to my ears. It's everything. It's everything. We're going to talk. Hopefully we can talk for a couple hours here and people can stay in and stay tuned. And I think it's amazing information. We could do a whole podcast just on the mental health part that I want to go back to. So many people don't understand the connection of diet and mental health. Luckily, Dr. Georgia Ede from Harvard.
Oh, she's amazing.
One of the only good people at Harvard. I'm kind of joking, but kind of not. I hate the Harvard T-Chan School of Public Health. They're the vegetarian biased people that put out all these bad epidemiological studies.
They have not helped the world. That's for sure.
Not helpful. We got Dr. Georgia Ede talking about working with patients and anxiety, mental health, all the stuff. And it's really comes down to diet, the gut microbiome, the nervous system, the gut-brain axis. Tell us more.
Yeah. So I'll tell you my favorite condition to work with in the mental health realm, and that's schizophrenia. Now, most people are really surprised that you can reverse schizophrenia at all, right? Because the medical record is not great. It's not excellent. The prescription recommendations are rarely helpful. They can be helpful short-term or in periods, but not usually long-term. But what's interesting is that, the Russians, they are so much better at nutrition just across the board. I think because their doctors actually study nutrition from the get-go. They have a pretty extensive knowledge, unlike physicians in the rest of the world. And they also study the microbiome, and they knew about it for so much longer than we did, and these kind of things. But do you know what the Russians have been doing with schizophrenia for at least the last 200 years?
No.
They've been putting their schizophrenics on fiber-free carnivore diets, and it's worked every time. Yeah. We didn't go into my backstory. Maybe we'll touch upon it later. But in the
For
process,
sure.
in the process of my own healing, I really fell in love with the GAPS diet because it reversed my conditions, very specific version of it. And so I've studied as much as I could with Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride, who is a Russian doctor. She now lives in the UK. And she also has a master's in nutrition.
So any practitioners who are working with the autism spectrum will note that there are often comorbidities along with the autism. A lot of these are often found in the gut lining, meaning that the child or the adult will have a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms along with it. So that's where Dr. Natasha kind of birthed her program of the GAPS diet. She thought, well, you know what? I'm going to go after and see if we shift this microbiome, if the body will rebuild its nervous system, and if maybe this child will get better, this child being her son. And it worked. It worked actually very, very well. And so she started seeing a lot of autistic children and autistic adults. And as these children and adults would start the GAPS diet, which is primarily soup-based, at least in the beginning, and lots of meat broths rather than bone broths, there's a lot of small discernments with this diet. The families would often go on the diet with the person with autism in support, and partly out of practicality as well. Nobody wants to short order chef in the kitchen every day. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting about this was that the parents would come back into her office and say, Dr. Natasha, you didn't know this, but I had this autoimmune condition and I've been doing this diet for our son and my lab work is perfect. I have no symptoms anymore. And so she started to collectively see all of these conditions start to reverse, honestly, a bit by accident. It was a beautiful ripple effect. So out of this came, now I came into Dr. Natasha McBride by chance while I was sick myself. Maybe we should go through my backstory a little bit and how I fell into that.
Yeah. It's such a great story. I've heard some of it already, but we really need to spell this out because it really helps paint a picture of why you're so passionate about health and why you're such a genius, a nutrition genius. You've dedicated your life to it. It really comes through in this story. So,
thank you.
And also quickly, just with the GAP stuff and the autism, I mean, this flies in the face of standard medical thoughts, right? That you can reverse autism, anything like that. People will call you a quack if you suggest it. So,
yeah. And it's a shame because practitioners see it all the time. It's not one lone practitioner that's seeing it. A lot of people see it. Can we say definitively what causes autism? No, but I do know the first case ever was, I think, in 1931, if I remember right, and we need to fact check that, but because I read that a long time ago. But it was so phenomenal of a case that psychologists from all over the world came to visit that boy. It was very unusual. So this isn't something that's been going on for a long time. I really think it's a microbiome illness, if I had to pin it down on something, and an over toxicity issue as well. I haven't found too many things that people really have to live with in terms of illness. I think we have a chance to get over that hump of whatever diagnosis we have, as long as we weren't born with it. You know, if someone comes in with Tay-Sachs disease, I don't know anyone who can do anything with that. But if you're not born with a condition, there's always a chance. There's always someone on the globe that's done it. Yeah, and I think we have to stick with that. It was a huge part of what I did when I was trying to heal myself. You know, there was no record of someone with my condition reversing their illness or illnesses. But what I held to was I just kept collecting stories of people that had reversed impossible conditions, from stage 4 cancers to neuropathies to the full gamut, paralyzation. And people keep doing it all the time. And if there's one person that can, then we all can, right? We're not that different.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, I think it's so important to hold on to. If any of you out there are sick, I never lose that drive. It's not hope. It's like a drive that you need to get through that. So what happened to me, or what happened for me, maybe, because it ended up being really great at the end and today.
Sorry. One quick thing I want to throw in before you go into your story. I just heard somewhere that only 2% of diseases, maybe less, are genetic, and that those are maybe the only ones yet. If you have Down syndrome, we can't just have a diet and cure that. Yeah. But, other than that, 98% of things we can heal from. I mean, we're not saying that it's 100%, but we can. We have the possibility. And it's just if you give your body the right environment, the right food, and the right lifestyle, and get it back to as close as we can to what a Homo sapien needs, then you have a great chance of doing that. So yes, now we can jump into your story, which we'll go into.
That's it exactly. Actually, I'm going to say one more thing on that note. Most of our genes come from our bacteria, and our bacteria are transient based on how we live and what we eat. So we have a lot of control over that. And I like to liken healing to the Hudson River. Do you remember back in the 70s, or maybe you would have read stories or articles about how the Hudson River was cleaned?
No, I was not born.
I find it fascinating because this river was so toxic that no one could swim in it, rather. And so the communities around the Hudson River got together, they banded together. It was during the hippie era, and they started cleaning out the water themselves. What they found was that when they got the water to about 50% less pollutants, suddenly the river took over and cleaned up the rest of itself. I find that a perfect analogy for the human body. Usually we are not, quote unquote, healing ourselves, or a practitioner is not healing us. We're getting out of the body's own way. It's excellent at healing, but something's in the way. And if you can just get a good amount of that, about 50% out, you've got a good chance of the body taking over and doing that for us. All right, so to my story.
Completely agree. Yeah, I am 100% agree. That's a huge difference between allopathic medicine and just any other type of medicine. Just lets your body do its thing.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's excellent at it. So in my story, I was a pretty normal kid. I grew up in the DC area and in Ohio and had great friendships, lots of activities, really quite healthy, played a ton of sports, maybe over-exercised. I definitely did that, but I enjoyed it. And when it came time to go off to college, I chose a school in the Bahamas. It was a field station. I was hoping to study marine ecology and later on be a marine biologist. And when I moved onto this field station, it was an interesting experience because it was on this big island called Andros Island. It's the largest of the Bahamas, but there's not really modern life there. There's one phone, there's one road and one car on the island, and and you don't have access to modern medicine. There's no tourism. So it's not what people think of when they think of the Bahamas. Really beautiful, incredibly beautiful, and a wonderful experience. But we weren't eating very well, meaning that we were just eating the food the field station was feeding us. It's a tongue twister. And and we were working long hours. We had 10 hours of school every day. And then we were young, so we would go out and hike among the forest and go play dominoes with the old men of the island. It was a blast, but we didn't get much sleep. So looking back on it now as a health practitioner, I can see many mistakes I was making. I was waking up at 5 to run for a couple hours and staying up late playing dominoes, eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Not great. Not great for the immune system. Anyway, the water got tainted on one of the days when I was there, and 15 of the 30 of us ended up ill, very, very ill. I was the last one to get it. And I honestly thought it was a flu. My young teenage naivety, I thought it was a flu and I would get better. But as the days crept on, my fever kept going up, and it was at about 106 for 6 days without them being able to bring it down with ice baths or Tylenol or any of those kinds of things. And so they ended up care flighting myself and 2 other individuals out to Florida. And unfortunately, at the time, they didn't actually take our blood work at the hospital. They just gave us a lot of drugs. And I don't know what they were, because I was, again, young and naive. I trusted medicine at that time. And I still do in other areas, in surgery and such. But anyway, we came back to the island and I never recovered. I never recovered after that. It was really interesting. The first day I tried to get up, my fever had come down. And it was like having a very high fever without the fever, meaning that, that kind of aura that you can see when you're sick, and how everything is just a bit tainted via the vision and you're a bit dizzy and wobbly. All that was there. And it felt like you were on a boat and you were very weak and everything hurt and the light was too bright. So kind of all the symptoms of a flu without the fever. Anyway, I kind of struggled through the rest of that semester and then went home, and these symptoms persisted, and then more things came in, and each day was quite different, and it would really increase, meaning that I would suddenly have insomnia. right? Where I couldn't sleep at all, but then I was tired all the time. And I don't mean the tired that a healthy individual has ever felt. It's a whole different thing. I had different reactions to foods. For instance, suddenly all I could think about was sugary foods and candy. And I'd never been an unhealthy eater. So, being an athlete, I prided myself on eating very well. And now I was thinking about candy bars all the time, which sounds insignificant, but with what I know about the microbiome now, I know what was going on. And I suddenly didn't react well to alcohol. I was young, so I would see my friends and have a drink, and I could actually black out. It would react very strongly. So all sorts of different physical things started happening. And my parents took me to several doctors, and they just kept saying, well, this is post-viral syndrome, and she'll eventually get better, but we don't know how long this will take. So we went on. During this time, my fevers kept going up and down on a daily basis. It could go up to 103 and then down to 97 in an hour, and then over and over. So it really wiped the body out. And I spent the bulk of the first 3 years in this kind of limbo phase where I didn't know what was happening. It was almost like, it's actually exactly like being in a brand new world where you can't really count on your body. You don't know what's going to happen from moment to moment or day to day, but you still want to hold on to a semblance of a life, and you try to plan things and all of that. Well, 3 years in, something very interesting happened. My mom got sick with what we thought was pneumonia. And so we took her to the hospital after caring for her at home for a while. And she was admitted, and they ran her blood. And when they looked at her results, they said, well, Judy, you have a very odd infection in your body. And she said, oh, what is that? And I said, well, this is usually only passed on from someone who's been living in the tropics, and usually someone young to someone old. And she said, well, that's really interesting because my daughter has been sick for 3 years and we can't figure out what it is. And they pulled up my records. Luckily, I had been to that hospital many times in those 3 years. And so they were able to pull up my file. And when they did, they saw that I had tested positive for that infection the entire time, but the physicians didn't know what they were looking at. So anyway, they treated me with antibiotics for that. And they ended up keeping me on those antibiotics at very strong hospital level for 2 years, which only somewhat helped. Honestly, my energy came back a slight amount, but not enough to really function or do well at school, those kinds of things. From there, I went back to college, and I was kind of struggling, trying to go to school, have some semblance of a life. And at the same time, I really wasn't telling anyone what was going on. I don't know about you. In the Midwest where I grew up, you don't talk about negative things usually. You don't want to talk about symptoms. I don't know. I felt quite embarrassed about my illness, so I didn't tend to share it. So most people didn't know what I was going through. I would just kind of, retreat for a week while I was in bed. And I would spend very long periods in bed during these first 7 years. So sometimes I would have to leave a semester midway, and then I would be in bed for about 3 months, sometimes just a week or two. It really varied and was very unpredictable. Well, at the 7-year mark, it became much worse, to where suddenly now my organs weren't functioning properly, and my kidneys were going and my liver was going. And I also really kind of left mentally, meaning I was so sick that I don't remember a lot of that time, to be fully honest. I wasn't very present at that time. And I really couldn't do anything for myself. I lost an enormous amount of weight, so much that I couldn't pick up a coffee mug. It was too heavy. And wow. Yeah, so really the muscle went along with it, and I started to get wasting from malabsorption. At this time, we still didn't know why I was so sick. I just kept getting more and more diagnoses, from kidney disease to liver disease to all sorts of things, 2 kinds of thyroid disease, right? Graves to Hashimoto's, and then back and forth. And basically my whole body was out of whack. And at the same time, my legs were always purple. I mean, bright purple. And they hurt more than I can't express the level of pain that I had from those legs. That was probably the worst symptom. So all of this happened, and I became bedbound, like for real this time, for a very significant amount of time, not 3 months, but for real. And so my parents came up and they got me from college, and they took me home. And it was a very depressing time. You know, I was this person who loved to travel the world and make art and have this big personality and this big social circle. And now I couldn't even read a book, you know, and I was moving home with my parents, and my parents are wonderful. We have the best relationship, even better from going through this illness. But nobody at 24 wants to move home with their parents. You want to be getting married or graduating or traveling the world and making your accomplishments. So it was a very depressing time to go through that. And that first year of being mostly bedbound was probably the worst of my entire life, genuinely. It was a really dark time. In movies, they really romanticize illness. They make it seem like this person has a diagnosis, but they can go ride roller coasters and they can fall in love and they can do all of these kinds of things. And the reality of illness, for anyone who's genuinely experienced it, is the opposite. You lose all of your identities. You don't have the energy to paint, even in bed, right? You read a book and you forgot what you read. You can't really identify as this great, literary scholar or this great painter or any other hobby. You genuinely lose all your hobbies. So while you might think, oh, you know, a year in bed, not so bad, you can do a lot of cool things, you're not doing anything cool at all. Instead, it's more like you're losing all of your identities, which ultimately is the best thing I think that could happen to anyone. It was certainly the best thing to happen to me, but as so many good things are, they don't feel good when you're going through them. So that was a very dark time. Now, at the end of that year, I was dealing with a lot of nerve pain. At that time, we knew I had a condition called POTS and dysautonomia, where the virus that I had when I was 18 had basically gone to the brain, and the extreme high fever had damaged the hypothalamus. And so I wasn't sending blood to my organs at the right time, which is why we were seeing so much organ disease in each of the organs. And subsequently, it also causes extreme nerve damage. So from my chest down, I had the kind of neuropathy that diabetics get, you know, when they have to lose their legs. It's like being on fire at all times. And luckily, I say luckily now, it wasn't lucky then, but luckily, pain medicine doesn't work for that. I think had pain medicine worked, I probably would have been addicted. So I'm very thankful it didn't, you know, because for so many years. But because pain medicine didn't work, I had to develop a lot of ways to cope with that pain and to try to get some sleep. And so one day, my aunt had given me a CD of meditation, and I had never meditated before. And I put it in, and I laid down on the bed, and it was a body scan meditation by John Kabat-Zinn. I can't recommend him more highly. He's wonderful. And at the time, I was really at my lowest, I would say. I was really just miserable with pain and miserable in all ways. There really wasn't a way out. You know, my doctors were saying, well, it's just going to get worse from here and then you'll be gone, kind of thing. And so I was laying down and I was with this pain. And as many people that have gone through severe pain or severe illness will tell you, if you're immature about it, the way I was, you really hate your body. You feel betrayed by your body. You feel angry and you feel let down and furious. And that's how I felt that day when I laid down for that meditation. And John Kabat-Zinn's body scan meditation, he starts you out with feeling your toes first and then the bottom of your feet. And the second he started talking about feeling the life in your toes and the blood flow and all these things, it was like I had stars in my body. I can't explain the transformation that happened, and it was instant. Suddenly I could feel, and here I was, you know, so close to death, and I could feel so much life in my body, more life than I had ever felt in my entire life, right? I was just radiant with it. And it made me fall in love with that practice. So I did that practice for 2 hours a day, every day, an hour every morning and every night. And immediately after that first one, even though the pain was still there, it was okay. It didn't bother me. I can't explain it. It was a very interesting experience. Meditation is really wonderful for pain management. But from that, the next year, the year 2 of being mostly bedbound and housebound, technically, I was just as sick as year 1, but it was one of the best years of my entire life. It was a really beautiful year. I got really close with my parents. The pain didn't bother me so much. I had lost my identities, so I wasn't rat race chasing or thinking about all the things I could be doing. It was just a really lovely time, despite nothing physically being different. And because I had been told by each of the hundreds of physicians that I saw, to be honest, I mean, my parents sent me to the best of the best. They flew me everywhere. They flew me to President Clinton's doctor and and all sorts of things, because each doctor said, there's no return from this. There's no getting better from this. I wasn't looking yet at physical things that I could do. And I thought that I ate very well. I ate a plant-based diet. I was a vegetarian, all these kinds of things. And I didn't eat very much. And because I wasn't looking at changing the physical things so much, because I thought I was doing the right thing, I started really looking at the lifestyle things. So I created this huge morning routine that I still do to this day, where I would meditate and then write in a gratitude journal, and not something trite like Thanksgiving, saying 3 things you're grateful for, but really getting to the emotion of it, right? And going deep, and especially towards my body at the time. I would go towards like my big toe. I would imagine living without a big toe and what it would be like. And then suddenly you feel immense gratitude for that big toe, right? So I did a lot of that kind of thing, and light therapy. And basically I was at a point where I was just throwing darts at a wall. If someone had told me to wear purple and dance the jig, I would have done it. If I thought it could get better, I really had humbled to such a degree. And I also knew at that point that no cure was going to come from the outside. This is year 8 of being this sick. And in the first many years, I think as many people do, just hope and pray that someone will create a drug and make all this better. But after so long and seeing so many physicians, you start to realize, like, no, if I'm going to get better, I have to do this myself. My parents aren't going to heal me. The doctors aren't going to heal me. This naturopath's not going to heal me. I've got to do this myself. I've got to figure this out. And so I did. I built this really beautiful lifestyle routine. And around that time, I started to read a lot more books because my cognition came back. And I used to be a voracious reader before this illness. So I was really excited about my cognition coming back. And I started reading a ton. And my dad and I, especially, and my mom as well, we would read all of these books written by physicians that when they got sick, they healed themselves through diet and lifestyle and these kind of things. And because there were no books written on the condition that I had, we would just try them all. So we tried everything from heart disease diets to cancer diets to longevity diets, you name it, depression diets. We did them all. And we would go about it in a scientific way. My dad is a physicist, right? So we had a very regimented way about this, where we would kind of set up a time in which we would expect results, and we wouldn't question the diet or protocol or lifestyle change until we had reached that time. And then we would evaluate if it was working or not, which was brilliant at the time. I didn't realize, but so many of these healing routines are so counterintuitive. You get worse before you get better. And so not all, but many are. Mine certainly was. And so that kept me going till the end, which was great. And it gave me a purpose, and it got me excited about life again. And I really started to feel like, you know what, I am going to get out of this. I am going to heal from this condition. This isn't the end. And so we tried about maybe 16 different things, mostly plant-based at the time. We did a lot of juicing, vegan, raw vegan, all the things everyone goes to first, right? And I was no different in that. And then I stumbled upon, and I don't even know how it fell into my hands, but I stumbled upon Weston A. Price's book, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind because here I was reading about the Maasai tribe, eating nothing but meat and milk and blood, completely the opposite of what everyone had been told to eat. And you've got to remember, this was way back, right? This isn't now when people are doing carnivore on YouTube. Like, this was way yes, when everybody was just like, eat more veggies and moderation is key. And I was blown away, and I had to look at the logic of it. If all of these individuals in the Maasai tribe are this healthy, and they're living in one of the harshest conditions to live in, right, with the most microbes, the most pathogenic microbes, and they're in perfect health, eating nothing but what they're telling us not to eat, I'm doing something wrong. And so I immediately started eating meat, and I brought it back into my diet, and I started following the Weston A. Price diet, and I got involved in the organization. And luckily enough, I went to one meeting. Now I can't tell you how rare this is because I didn't have energy to go anywhere, or I didn't drive for years because of this, right? Because I would have pot seizures and all sorts of things. And so I actually went to this one local Weston A. Price meeting, and at it, there was a beautiful woman speaking. And she had been in medicine, and she had gotten horrifically ill with quite serious MS to the point where she was in a wheelchair, and had done this GAPS diet by Dr. Natasha McBride. And she had fully reversed it. She was the picture of health. I've really never seen someone so radiantly beautiful. And so I pulled her aside afterwards, and I was like, hey, I introduced myself, and I was like, listen, I have a nervous system disease, and I would love to try this diet. Would you coach me through it? And she's like, well, I'm not a nutritionist, but I'll guide you through it. And she did. And she put me on a very strict version, which was basically just chicken soup. And you home make it, you cook it the way people did 200 years ago, and all these kinds of things. And it was interesting because in many people's eyes, you could say I was doing everything right dietarily. I was eating the ferments, I was doing the organ meat, I was doing the sprouted grains and minimal, because I was very low carb and pretty ketogenic at that point. I had long realized that helped with the nervous system disorder. So just a few small tweaks and repetition on the GAPS diet got me to really amazing result. When I started the diet, I had so little energy, I couldn't stand in the kitchen for more than 3 minutes without getting a pot seizure or passing out. So I had to really kind of strategize how I could cook for myself. And I was doing this on my own. I did most of the diets on my own. My parents would help me with the research, and then I would do the diets. And so I figured that if I just cooked one big pot of soup, then I could eat off that soup for every day of the week. And then I'm just heating up leftovers, which takes less than 3 minutes of standing to do.
Yeah. Before you go on, did the Weston Price diet improve your health, or what happened before this?
No, it absolutely did. So the vegetarian, the vegan, and the raw diets all made me horrifically worse, like truly worse. Like I will never do those again worse personally, but that's not surprising given what I know now with the nutrients that the nervous system needs. And I had a very severe nervous system disorder. So it was really the wrong match, right? Weston A. Price and also going low carb really helped. So I think I figured out maybe 4 years before I fully went into remission or found the GAPS diet that I needed to be low carb. For instance, if I ate a mango or a bowl of mango or fruit, I would be up all night in pain with nerve issues. So I had learned to be low carb for quite some time, but I hadn't fully eliminated like all sweet potato or all rice. I would just eat tiny portions so that I could still be in ketogenic or low carb ratios. Yeah, Weston A. Price very much helped me. And honestly, it got me cooking. And it was so interesting. I mean, I love what Weston A. Price does for the dietary world. I think it really highlights the fact that people can be healthy on so many different diets, but they need to eat seasonally and locally, and they have to remember the old preparation methods of certain foods.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'll be forever grateful to their organization.
So then the soup, So you made it in batches.
Yeah, so I would make these big batches, and then every day I would just eat the soup, usually twice a day. I was intermittent fasting without knowing it because one of the medications I took, which was $2,000 a month, by the way, for that one medication, I was on 17 medications, right? So that was one of 17. It was insane. But one of the medications, if you took food within 4 hours, it wouldn't work, and you had to take that at nighttime. So I, by default, and then I had my morning routine where I wouldn't eat. So I was eating in like a 5-hour window, and I was having 2 bowls of soup with enormous amounts of fat and very few carrots and onions. It was very ketogenic, probably 90 to 80% fat. Anyway, by the end of the first month, I felt like death, to be perfectly honest with you. I felt much worse, but I went for my monthly check-in with my neuromuscular doctor, and he tested my nerves as he always does, and they were functioning. And he couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I thought I was worse. But he came back and he tested them again. And then he left. And then he came back and he tested them a third time. And he goes, Mary, I can't explain this, but your nerves are functioning. They're functioning. Your nerves are working. And he said, Mary, I don't know what it is that you are doing, but whatever it is, you need to keep doing it. So it was him actually that kept me staying on that diet, because had I gone by my symptoms, I would have thought I was worse. And I was so much better. I will always be forever. Dr. Shuck, if you ever hear this, thank you. So I stayed on the diet, and I didn't improve much, but I did get small things in the beginning, like my body temperature regulated. There's so much to compress into trying to tell my backstory. It's hard to prioritize, but small things like not regulating your body temperature are very noticeable comfortable when you're ill. So everyone would be hot, I would be cold, and vice versa. So about 4 days into the diet, suddenly I was like everyone else. I felt the same as they did, which was a really good indication. And then about the 4-month mark, my legs stopped turning purple. They weren't pulling blood anymore, which was really exciting. And I was able to get off a couple medicines. And during all this time, I used a breathing machine at night. It was a condition, caused by the POTS. It's very similar to sleep apnea, but it's a little different because you're just not sending blood to the lungs. And then the nervous system isn't communicating to the heart to send the blood to the lungs. And so you just kind of stop breathing. And during the day, you can catch it, but at night you can't. So I was using this breathing machine that I really hated, and honestly was most of my motivation for getting through this diet. I just kept thinking every time I wanted to eat something else, like, do you want that fried rice or whatever it might be and the breathing machine, or do you want no breathing machine? So it really helped. But yeah, by the end of the first year, well, actually by the 6-month mark, I was off all but 2 medications, which was remarkable. My kidney, liver, thyroid function all had normalized. And some of those were with some additional things as well. But they all regulated and have stayed normal to this day. And by the 12-month mark, I wasn't using the breathing machine anymore. And I was in full remission. I was headed back to school, finished my degree, and then went back to school for nutrition, because as many people who go through this process, it's kind of a religious experience to realize that there's this immense secret knowledge, or a secret garden, right, of knowledge, that we have kind of infinite, what felt like infinite capabilities, right? Yeah. It felt that way. I'm sure it's not true. But yeah, so then I went back to school and studied nutrition and opened up practice. And to be honest, I think because I'm from the Midwest, where people aren't too into the natural world, I didn't think anyone would ever pay me to do this kind of work. I really did it as a hobby, and I had my day job. I was the director of a nonprofit. And almost immediately I was full, and I stayed full for all these years. Now I'm closed, but it was always full, and it was really great getting to work with so many people. And now, looking back on it, you realize it really was the best thing that could have happened to me to go through that, because now I'm sitting here with this job and I get to work with about 20 people a day, and each person has a totally different condition and needs a different diet and different protocol. And each one of them is like a little puzzle. So my work is endlessly engaging and rewarding. And I end up with more energy at the end of the day, which not too many people can say. So I slid into this amazing career, really a vocation. And had I not had a disease that was in all those different organs, I wouldn't have had the confidence to help people get through that. I would have been very skittish, I think, about thinking that kidney disease could be reversed, or liver disease, or thyroid, these kind of things. So I think it was a real, real blessing.
Wow. That's a great attitude about it.
One thing I want to highlight about my backstory and my dealing with illness is that approach that I took to that first week of being on the GAPS diet is actually what I did through the entire thing. So the GAPS diet is really interesting in that 100 different people following the GAPS diet will be doing very different things on that diet, and it will look very different to each of them. They have the common threads of no starch and these kind of things, but mine was very strict. So I literally ate chicken soup for every meal for 2 years, literally. And wow. Yeah. And I am not puritanical. I'm an Epicurean by heart and by nature. So this did not come easily, and it did not come naturally. I really, really relied on my lifestyle activities, my morning routine, and my reframing of the whole situation. And had I not had that terrible first year, mostly in bed, which ended up being 4 years in total of that phase, but that really bad one in the first one that was so difficult. And had I not developed those coping skills, I don't think I would have made it through the GAPS diet, to be perfectly honest, because you eat the same meal so many times in a row and nobody likes it anymore, right? I didn't even like chicken, to be honest. I didn't like meat. So at the time, now I love it. I'm very grateful for it. So I had to really reframe my thinking around this. And I think this is important for people to hear, because so often when we get clients or we're speaking with someone in a medical capacity, they're often like saying their preferences. And preferences have to go out the door when you want a goal as big as healing. Healing is a little bit like winning the Olympics, right? It's not guaranteed. You have to work so hard for it. And most of that work is internal, to be perfectly honest. So I found myself maybe at about week 3, just not even wanting to look at this bowl of soup anymore. I just could not look at the soup and eat more chicken. And so I thought about that and I was like, well, is that true? Can I really not eat more chicken? This could be my ticket out. So I whipped out my gratitude journal and I broke it down. And this is a practice I still do to this day if I ever feel unhappy about something. I was like, well, let's see here. Now, somebody had to raise this chicken, and that's a lot of work. So someone was raising this chicken, and then somebody had to butcher this chicken, and I don't want to butcher a chicken. I definitely don't want to butcher a chicken. So I'm pretty grateful somebody butchered this chicken for me. And then somebody cut up this chicken, and somebody drove it from the processing to the grocery store. And all the while, they're keeping the sanitary and clean, and then the grocery store is there, and they're selling it, and the butcher is so nice, and he's so helpful. And then, oh my God, I have money to buy this chicken. That's amazing. I have money to buy these groceries. That's wonderful. And I can drive now. I missed driving. I can actually drive, and maybe it's the soup that's helping me do that. So I would get myself really, really grateful for the soup. And I'll tell you why that's so important. What we now know with studies is that if you feel stressed about what you're eating, you're releasing stress chemicals into the body. And when stress chemicals are released into the body, that's not a place where you're going to heal and renew a cell. We renew cells when we're rested and we're not stressed. So I didn't know that, but I did know that I wasn't going to digest well or get through this diet if I didn't find a state of gratitude about what I was doing. And I think one of the biggest things I was grateful for was that I potentially had a way out of this illness. How many people just live on their medications until they're dead? I had a potential way out, and I was really excited about that. So I focused on that, and I became so grateful for that bowl of soup. And when I got better, maybe you would say, why didn't you start eating other food? I didn't, because it was so stinking phenomenal that I was better. I didn't want to change anything.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. This is great. And so I think it really highlights that you can have the same experience. Those 4 years I was mostly bedbound and housebound, or that same bowl of soup over and over. And it can be that first year that I was in, internal hell in that bed, or it can be the last 3. That's true bliss and a wonderful state. And it's not the circumstances that change. And it's a really important thing to understand with illness, because illness is not quick, right? Like going back to the movie example I mentioned earlier, people in the movies, they're fine except for a diagnosis, and then they get sick, and they die. But the reality of chronic illness is that it's like your best friend that you're with every single day, and you really want to ditch this best friend and get a better one, but you can't. And so you have to find a way to play mind games with yourself so that you're not constantly stressed out. And that very much comes into food. So when I talk about food with my patients, we spend a lot of times on the approach to food, because the approach to food and the internal reaction to the food is, I would say, equally important as to what you're actually putting on your plate.
Well, no, I think it matters a lot is your attitude around it. And I don't want to get woo-woo either. So I'm glad you're talking about these biochemical pathways and stress hormones and this and that, because even with my podcast with Aviahe Hauptmann, the Greenland woman, the PhD, and I started talking about a little bit about your attitude about things matters while you're eating it. And maybe I got one comment from a listener saying, oh, that sounded a little weird. And you circled back to that and, it was kind of weird. I'm like, well, there's something to it. I mean, the placebo effect is real.
Well, the placebo effect is real, which we need to study more, because that can be everyone's tool, but it is actually science. You release different chemicals. And what most people don't realize is what is stress and when are they experiencing. So, for instance, when you take a hot shower, your cortisol goes up. Your body is stressed. If you go on a plane, you could be going somewhere you really love. Like, let's say you've always wanted to fly to Hawaii and you're so excited about it. Your body is freaking out. It's pumping out so much cortisol and stress chemicals because it's getting new smells, new sounds, new vibrations. It's dehydrated from the flight, right? So you're releasing a lot of cortisol and a lot of histamines. And there's a huge portion of the population that cannot break down histamines right now due to their bacterial dysbiosis. So you add actually have a chemical reaction to this. And one thing that I think in our culture, especially in America, we are so driven and we're so pick ourselves up by our bootstraps, which can really save us when we're sick, to be honest, but it can also damage us. But because of that, we're not really good at tuning in and seeing what relaxation and stress feels like. So what I often have people do to start working on this is not even give them the option of those stressful activities. So like when they're eating, they are not allowed to watch Netflix or TV because the body will often respond with stress to what's happening on the screen without the person even realizing it. Right? But if you take their blood, their cortisol is going to be high, and therefore they're not going to digest things as well. So I often get them sitting at a table and doing nothing. They can't read, they can't use their phone, nothing. They can listen to classical music. That's about it, or they can talk with someone. And that's really, really helpful. But yeah, it's not woo. In fact, a lot of the things, there's a lot of woo out there, but a lot of the things that we think of woo, we end up finding science to support it later. And to be honest, we do this to patients as well. This may seem disconnected, but I think it's actually connected. One thing that I always try to convey to my patients, especially if they don't have a diagnosis yet, or if they have some unnamed chronic illness, and say like the CFS that we were talking about earlier, where you kind of get a lot of judgment and blame for having that illness because everyone's like, well, you should be better since you don't have a solid diagnosis. That is how we have always treated illness that we didn't know about, that we didn't have a marker for. So if you take something like MS, multiple sclerosis, before there was a blood marker for that, before you could actually test for that, people were called the worried well in medical literature. I mean, can you imagine that? If you know someone with MS and you would tell them this is just in your head, that's a horrific thing to do to someone.
Wow, yeah.
So I think a lot is blamed on internal dialogue or the way someone approaches something and these kind of things. And that's not what I'm trying to do here. But what I'd like to emphasize is that you can actually take responsibility for this. So you can do a lot of things to relax your body, even if you don't feel it, like listening to classical music and sitting at a table instead of eating in the car. It's very important. And with the woo things, who cares, right? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, whatever gets someone better is great. And I think you really need that openness to get better, not that naivety or gullibility. And you certainly don't have to believe that the protocol that you're doing is going to work. I didn't personally believe the protocol that worked for me was going to work, but I did believe that I would get better. And that is very important. I think the end goal is important and not the way. And there's something healthy about being willing to do anything to heal. When I hit year 7, when I was telling you about, I finally got to a point where I was so humbled by the illness, so incredibly humbled, that I was like, you know what? I am going to wear purple and dance the jig if that is what will heal me.
Yeah, I love that. The perseverance, the will to fix it. And yeah, some people don't have that. And guess what? Those people probably don't ever fix things. So that's really important.
Yeah, another pattern that I really notice, and I don't know if this will hold through the next few years of practice, but an interesting thing that I notice, and maybe it's just a coincidence, it may be, but I notice a lot of times, if I can get someone through their morning routine, through their inner work, to not care so much if they heal, but do all the work that they need to do to heal, something happens. I don't know if it's from the physical relaxation that you get from relaxing into the situation and not striving while still doing all the work to get there, but there's some little magic that happens there when patients really genuinely are like, you know what, my life is actually good despite this illness. That's when something changes. I think that's really important to teach people to cultivate, because it is something that can be cultivated no matter your physical stance. And you can actually enjoy life today as opposed to waiting. So, tying back to the mental health work, that was a natural bridge to do that, because a lot of these lifestyle techniques aren't worked or aren't used in traditional therapy. But they're becoming so. You've got these limbic programs like the amygdala and the gupta and all these kinds of things, which are really great and can be used, or you can devise your own as well. But then you've got the dietary aspect, which in mental health is rarely addressed. And it's a real travesty, because a lot of mental health conditions, anorexia, bulimia, are not mental health at all. They're quite physical. If you take a group, an animal, let's take the rats, because they've done this many times with them, and you pull zinc out of their diet, do you know what happens? They become bulimic and anorexic. The second you pull zinc out of their diet, you put the zinc back in and they stop the behavior. So that's one common cause.
I just know that so many young females are deficient in zinc. They're avoiding animal foods that have bioavailable zinc.
Yes. So when a girl starts menstruating, she loses a lot of the meat-based vitamins through her menstrual cycle. So she loses a lot of the zinc, a lot of the iron. And a lot of these girls eating the modern diet are already borderline with zinc deficiencies. In fact, I see zinc deficiencies everywhere. You can often spot them on a person because the person will get white spots on their nails. Of course, you'd want to do a blood work to confirm that, but it's a common way to see it. When someone becomes zinc deficient, two things happen. One is that they become averse to meat. And two is that they can develop eating disorders very easily. It's almost written in stone. And what do we see? But all of these girls suddenly not wanting to eat meat, right? And developing eating disorders around this age. So it's very much a physical issue. And there are many other physical issues that we'll get into too in part 2 of our podcast. For all of you out there, I am on the island of Ikaria. This is not a touristy island by any means. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's actually very close. Well, that's not very nice to say or true. It's very close to the island of Turkey, and it's not a big touristy island, so they don't have strong internet. In fact, it was very difficult to find a place to do it, although they've all been very helpful in trying to support this podcast happening. And I'm so glad it did, because I think it's really important. You know, most of the people that have come to Ikaria and filmed it and spoken of it did not have a nutritional background to stand on, right? So they came with an eye for passion, maybe an eye of interest, these kind of things. But it's different when you've spent your life studying nutrition and helping people with nutrition to really see what people are eating and what's happening.
Yeah. Information is so good. This is one of my favorite podcasts of all time. I want to talk to you forever. We're going to have an amazing part 2 where we're going to get deeper into all this stuff. I think this is going to be so interesting to people because we're talking about these really hot topics now. It's like, oh, an all meat diet and plant toxins and all this stuff. But from someone like you, it's not this Sean Baker versus Paul Saladino drama and weird things going on. And all, I don't know what's going on with this animal-based world these days. I'm glad I'm not anywhere near part of it. But it's like, oh, the honey, this guy's like in big honey's giving Paul millions. And like Sean Baker's like, you don't need honey. Very weird. When we have Mary here who's lived it, she's had an amazing story of healing. You're passionate about it. You're so smart. You've researched this for years. You've studied all the traditional living cultures. You've traveled around. You're like a modern Weston Price. I'm so glad you brought up Weston Price, and it's part of your healing story because
Saved my life.
It's everything. Yeah, his work just kind of started the path to so many people's healing and rediscovering what nutrition really is and how people should live. So we're going to get into so many things when we come back. We still have a list of notes we're going to cover. Part 2 is going to be awesome. That's all I'm going to say.
There's so much I want to share with you and so many treasures to behold. So we'll have a great part 2.
Okay, I hope everyone's just excited and just waiting by their phone. I am waiting for next time we can talk anxiously. And thank you so much. And yeah, have a great day in Ikaria.
Thank you for bearing with me with all the internet troubles. You have been so patient and gracious, and I can't wait to film part 2 when we've got some good internet when I'm back in Athens. So everybody stay tuned, and thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, just to make sure everyone knows, we're going to go to Africa.
We are going to Africa together. We're going to go study with the tribes. We're going to see a lot of different diets, a lot of different traditional diets, and really inspect the health and see if all that they've said is true.
All right. Well, Bill Schindler has already confirmed this. But yeah, I've been talking to him as well. So, and Saladino, actually. Saladino wants to come along. I don't know.
It would be amazing if you could.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens. I think there's going to have to be a round 2 of visiting Africa even.
I think so. That sounds good.
Okay. Take care, Mary.
Thank you so much. Talk to you next time.
Okay. Bye. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for giving the podcast a review. Check out sapien.org and nosetotail.org, where all the action is happening. We got the Sapien program. We have the Sapien tribe. We have the Nose to Tail meets. We have all the new Nose to Tail products coming out. Make sure to follow all the accounts on social media just by searching Food Lies and Nose to Tail or Sapien. Food Lies, Nose to Tail, or Sapien. That's where we're at online. And we're putting out good stuff each week. We have new videos coming out on Sapien, the Food Lies YouTube channel. Join the newsletter, sapien.org. Get the free food guide at sapien.org. Whew. That's it. See you next week for part 2 with Mary. It's so good. She's amazing. I can't wait for you guys to hear the next episode with her. See you next time.